Welcome back to The Unified Solution. My name's Carl Liebold, and regular listeners to the show will be very familiar with my next guest. He's joined us every week since I've been on the air and off the air. His name is Fitzroy Sterling, and whenever we have Fitz around, you know we're going to be talking Magna Carta 1215. G'day, Fitz. How are you, mate?
Good morning, my friend. Yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm really excited to actually get through this one because this is one I've been keen to do for a while.
Well, I've got to say, I'm pretty excited about this one too. Now, we've started our Words Mean Things series. We've got quite a few of those already uploaded. We're going to really deep dive into a word here, or a couple of words, police and constable. Now, constable was initially how the police were named back in, well, the 1200s, let's say. Is that a fair way of describing constable?
Yeah, that's pretty apt. I can't actually do any better than that. So, yeah. It's correct. Yeah, that they were created for the purpose of being a peacekeeper.
Okay, so well, let's define constable to start out then.
Yeah, so the office, as you can see the slide, it was created as an office, just like the sovereign office of sovereign was the head of state. Roles needed to be created in that whole government structure, and so they created the office of constable, and that was to keep the peace. And so it gets its grant of authority from the people to protect their sovereignty. So we've dug into what sovereignty means. So that means that they are above the rulership and control of anyone else. So that's what they were there to do, to make sure that no one else would ever impose their will over the people. And so they do that by upholding the law. And so the law, obviously, in this regard, is meant that which is created by the people through the way they've already lived, so through their customs, the traditions, and their rules.
Yep.
And then they just codified that. So that means they arranged that in a systemized way into a sealed document that we would call a constitution. And in our case, it's called the 1215 Magna Carta. So that's how they get their grant of authority, because the people decided this is how we want to live, because we already live like this. Now we just need to have people who we charge with the authority to make sure that that doesn't ever get infringed upon.
Okay.
So to keep the integrity of that agreement.
So let's just recap, because I think that's a very important point. Constables came into being with a grant of authority from the people, not from government, not from the sovereign. They came into being with the grant of authority from the people, and their job was to protect the people's sovereignty as outlined in Magna Carta 1215 and is still current. They also had to uphold the laws of the day. Now, we've already discussed previously, but let's just recap quickly. Laws back in the 1200s were not set up the same way they are today. Government hadn't even been invented. There was nothing called legislation back in 1215. The laws of the day were basically figured out by the people themselves. If you wanted to sell your goat, you wanted to get milk in return, or probably not milk, probably vegetables or something from another farmer, you figured out a barter trade that was of value, the similar value to each of you. That progressed as money came into being, and then coins of value or metals of value started to be used. The constables were there to make sure that those laws that we were acting under before they were formalised or codified, as you said, and sealed by King John in Magna Carta 1215, those laws were protected by the constables. They acted, I suppose the easiest way is to describe them as acting as police today, and yet they don't have the same powers as the police today. Would that be a fair way of saying that?
Yeah, so I think you did a brilliant job of it, actually. Basically, what they are today is like I don't even know how to explain it. It's some distortion beyond belief, what they are today versus to what they started out to as, and what they started out and what their intended purpose was has no bearing, or very little, on what their function is today. And so obviously we'll dig deeper into that as we go along. But yeah, that's pretty accurate, actually.
So it's fair to say that the constable was part of the people, for the people, right up until the time, I'm taking a guess here, I'm sort of foreshadowing, right up until about the time that government was created. Does that sound about right?
That's pretty much it. Yep, they just started changing its role, like chipping away at it slowly, piece by piece, adding more things, taking other things, to the point that we would never notice it.
Yeah.
So it was just a slow, gradual decay And that's why we've got to where we are, because it's never immediate. It's always very gentle and slow.
So they've slowly been gaining power through the institution of government, which has
Yes.
perverted the institution of constable.
Correct.
And today, what we're seeing is the end result. Jackbooted, young blokes, young women marching around with absolutely no compassion, and will blindly follow orders.
Yeah, like basically what you said, the constable was from the people, of the people, like the same as, the Constitution is from the people, of the people, yeah?
Yep.
And for the people. The constable is exactly created this. Why would it be any different, right? So the office was created exactly the same. And so what we see today is not anything close to that or resembles that, yet majority of people are just so used to that that they just think that's just normal and natural.
Yeah.
But you're right, the government did do that so they could reappropriate it for their purposes. And that's why it had to be done slowly.
Well, they turned the constable, from what I'm interpreting from you, they turned the constable from somebody who oversaw the community to somebody who enforced on the community.
Correct. Yep. That's pretty much it. And it couldn't be done immediately because it'd be too obvious.
Yep.
So it had to be done very slowly and gradually and over generations. So each generation was born at a different starting point. And so they didn't have the consciousness of what the previous generation did. And so it was always a slow, gradual decline. And so here we are today, where they're basically a private army.
Do you ever look back, Fitz, and say, I remember my parents saying, gee, it wasn't like this. Things have changed so much since I was a young person. And when we were young people, we looked at them and said, well, that's because you're old and you don't understand what's going on. And now we're a bit older. We're able to look back at history and just see, well, how important it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, when you're young and your parents are saying that to you, you just think they're just out of touch. And then obviously as you grow and you start seeing the changes that you've, noticed, when you reflect back, you start going, wow, now I sound like my parents. So you're not that different from them. And yeah, things change for a reason. Unfortunately, we don't have the control over it. And that's the sad part is it was never meant to go that way. It was always meant to stay in the hands of the people, because the constable was a representative that came from the people and they were separate to government. So they never had any authority from government. All the authority always came from the people. And that's just a really big part that's been lost.
And that would be an extremely strong bond between the constable and any court for trial by jury, I would imagine.
Yeah, you've nailed it like perfectly. Absolutely. We'll get into that in a little bit, and we'll actually get into what you just said with a bit more detail to show you just how much power the constable did have when it came to the trial by jury structure.
All right, well, let's move on.
Okay, so back to a little more detail about the constable and how one was actually given that position. It was nothing that they actually chose. It was more that the people chose them, and they chose them through the confidence that whoever they believed had full knowledge of natural law and the common law of the land, right? So all the rules and the customs and the traditions that the people live by.
Yep.
Someone who was able to demonstrate they really had a strong knowledge of that, then only they would have the confidence of the people for the people to wish to elect them into that position. And they had to come from the community from which they lived in. And the structure was they were only answerable to their chief constable and the people, and never government. So the understanding was that they need to be separate from government because government needs to be under our control. Yeah. So if they were to be under the control of government, then that means that government would be controlling us. And so that's why that was clear that they could have nothing to do with government. And so the only jurisdiction that they were given the grant to operate under was that of natural law and common law of the land. So it's just that simple. And that way, people would always be protected because they were really protecting them from government ever having anything interference in their lives, if you really think about it. Because that was their role, was to protect the sovereignty, so that they could never be controlled by an external force. That was what the people created them to be. And also obviously keep the peace amongst each other if there was ever friction, and if there was ever any sort of violations between each other, how that would play out, so people could get that restoration of their dignity, and they had a role in that, but not the role they have today, and obviously we'll see that a bit later, the difference in the role.
We're talking of a time now where the Old Testament comes into play, and I'm thinking particularly of one phrase from the Old Testament, an eye for an eye. Natural law, common law, back in the 1200s and prior to that period, really did work under an eye for an eye kind of justice, didn't it?
Yeah, to some degree. It was about restoring the equity. So eye for an eye is a little bit, it sort of seems a little bit too extreme in some cases, because like if someone hurts you, you hurt them back. It's a little bit more balanced than that. It's like if there was an accidental harming, where you don't just accidentally harm someone back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, true.
So it was held in the regard of what the context of it was, because if we're punishing someone for something they did accidentally, that's not really an equitable outcome. So it had to be in reference to how things were done. So if someone had malicious intent, and that was established, that they were doing it, for the purpose of, make sure that someone suffers, and it was premeditated. Yeah. Well, then, that individual was seen as highly dangerous, so they needed to be out of the picture, so they couldn't keep doing it. But if it was someone,
sorry, keep going.
Oh, yeah. So, but if it was something that was done without, premeditation, it was just the way circumstances panned out. Then you're not. There isn't that punishing energy around it.
Can I leap forward 800 years now and take what you've just said and try and apply that to a work cover sort of situation today?
Yeah, let's give that a go.
So work cover, I go to work, I have an expectation that I'll be safe at work, and my employer generally makes my workplace safe. What happens if I have an accident at work under this system?
Well, that's the really tricky part, because if it's established that there was deliberate negligence on your employer because they were cutting corners and they knew that, there's a risk of you getting harmed if they didn't implement certain strategies and need to pay for it, etc. Mm-hmm. If that was proved, well, then that's malicious intent. But if it was, something where they crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's, and it was just a matter of, dumb luck or something, where there was just a lapse of concentration on the employee's part, well, then that's a different situation. So it needs to be proven what was there, what was the intent. Yep. And if the jury can't find there was malicious intent behind what the employer's actions were, then they wouldn't get prosecuted for that. But there would still need to be some kind of, if there was an accident, there'd still need to be some kind of balance put back, so there can be confidence in that the employer and the employee can actually work together in harmony. So their role would be to try and work out what that would be if it was proven there wasn't malicious intent, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it all hinges on malicious intent as to what the actual outcome would be. So we're always working off that energy of, if it was just, the situation and conditions that were sort of, how they call it an act of God, because they have a better explanation for it. Sometimes they're just things that are beyond most people's control, and it just happens. Yeah. Well, then you're not going to really be punishing anyone.
No, true. There is a saying for that, and somebody made a lot of money with a T-shirt on it. Shit happens.
Yeah. And so there's that sort of space for allowance for that. But yeah, if there is malicious intent, well, then it's known that, the employer themselves aren't fit to hold that position where others are in danger when they're in that environment that the employer has control over. Yep. Well, then that needs to be rectified. So it would kind of work in that sort of regard, if that sort of helps make that clear.
All right, so let's recap. The constable was appointed by the people, for the people, and essentially was around long before government. Government then came into being. Now, we're talking here the late 1260s. The first government, I think, was established in 1272, and by 1274, the Freemasons had moved in. Is that where the constable well, probably name wasn't changed. Police, I don't think, came into being until the 1900s. But
Yeah, that's okay.
but the constable, is that where the job of the constable started to be perverted?
Yeah, as soon as the construct of government came up, so the government was an extension of the king's court. So the king had their council, people that they would
Indeed.
go to for advice, etc.
And that would include things like the Vatican representative.
Yeah, I was just about to go. There was religious figures in there. So
Yeah.
you just sort of bet me to the punch.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No, it's quite all right. But it means that we're on the same wavelength. So that was the important part is that, yes, there is influences from, how should we say, not, how would I put it diplomatically, people who aren't thinking about the common good of the community, more how they're going to get what they want.
Exactly. How to
that
bring
was sort of the influencing forces that were surrounding the king, and then government pretty much was built off that energy. So it was never going to be anything that was going to be in service of the people.
And I think we've explained before that it was at least a very easy plan to hatch in the beginning, because communication in the 1200s is not at all like it was or is today, where everybody gets everything communicated directly to their mobile phone. Back in the day, the only time you got to read a king's communication was if it was nailed to a tree or to the door of an inn. And even then, you had to be lucky enough to know how to read to be able to understand it.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're saying it, like the level of literacy at that time was not that great.
No.
So you'd be left to other people's interpretation, and they're telling you what they're reading. So that's a lot of power to leave in one's hands.
Now, let me throw back to a story that everybody is familiar with, Robin Hood. Now, the nemesis in the Robin Hood series is the Sheriff of Nottingham. The Sheriff was, if you like, the senior constable of the day, wasn't he?
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's a really good way to depict it. Yeah.
So, without putting too much faith, while the Robin Hood story is based loosely in fact, let's not go down the road of the merry men and whatnot too much. But I think it's easy for people to understand the relationship then between the constable and the people, how a good constable would have been versus how a bad constable would have been. And clearly, King John was the king they were fighting against in the Robin Hood series, from memory. So
yeah,
this is about that time. The sheriff was one of King John's evil henchmen, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really apt description. Quite brilliant, actually, how you pulled that out.
Oh, please.
So, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. Like, you can see how that position can be subverted for someone's personal gain. That's how easily it can be done, because the people didn't have that innate connection, because that was kept from them. And so that it can only happen if the people aren't conscious of what the roles are, and they themselves have power over it. As soon as they don't know that, that's when these kind of changes happen. So yeah, that's why it was a great example.
Well, I'm only trying to bring out my brilliance occasionally for you. Can't let you have all the glory. So, all right, let's move on. We move from the constable now. We've established government. The constables are now acting under legislation.
So before we go to that, I want to bring up a couple more slides that just gives a bit more depth to the power of the constable, if that's okay, sure, before we move into that. All right, so this just gives a little bit more depth to just how much power the constable had before we move into police.
Wow. Okay.
So they had a higher standing than politicians, than judges, than magistrates, barristers, and solicitors, because they were given the grant of authority to enter any courtroom to ensure everyone within that court, which would be, obviously judges, magistrates, barristers, etc., is acting within the law of the land. And they had the powers to arrest any of those that I just mentioned, that were acting beyond what the law of the land allows.
Wow.
So if any judge started now making judgments against, or a magistrate started making judgments against the people without the permission, not that they would have that, but if they didn't inform the jury of their role, the constable can actually come in and arrest them for actually going past their grant of authority. And so there's actually, I think there's two times I've read that, I think it was King Alfred the Great. He had magistrates hung for that very reason, when they overstepped the boundary of what they were given a grant of authority to do. So when they made judgments over the accused, and the accused suffered because of it, they then got hung, because that was how important it was that there was no stepping over the line. And so the constable has that role, right? And today you would never see that. You wouldn't even know that that existed, as that was their role. No one's ever going to be aware of that.
Court these days, then they are the lowest member of the organizer of the company in the building. The constable is the lowest, the judge being the highest.
Yeah, so it's a total inversion of what was actually meant to be in place. So that just sort of gives people an appreciation of how far we are from what we were supposed to have, and what the people created as a mechanism by which they would never, ever be violated by an external body that they themselves created.
So before the government was created, the constable had higher standing, than politicians. Well, politicians weren't around until government was created. Neither were judges, magistrates, barristers, or solicitors. So essentially, until government was created, the power rested with your locally elected, locally known constable.
Yes, so that was seen as a really honourable position. If you were, given that opportunity, most people would jump at it, because that was seen as a position of honour, where today it's entirely different.
Be a very, very highly esteemed position in the community, one would think.
Yes, because you are
being denigrated to a much lower standing in community, a huge lack of respect that people have for the police these days, because it seems the police don't respect themselves. They can't respect the authority that they've been granted by the people, and yet seem to expect the people to just bow down to them. This is clearly not happening in many places around in Australia and around the world at the moment. All power to us. So the slide we've currently got at the moment is indicating that this is now post-government, because we're talking politicians, judges, magistrates, barristers, and solicitors. This is after the legal was introduced and Magna Carta 1215 became suppressed.
Yeah, that's pretty much, it had to go that way if they were going to control people. It just couldn't, you couldn't do it any other way, because they needed to use the institutions the people created for their protection to invert them and use them as an institution that would control the people.
They became an enforcement arm, arm for the government, not the people.
Correct. Yes. Hence the executive, right? They execute, what they're being told to do. The difference is, instead of the people telling, the constable what they require, it's that fictional invention that we created doing it for us instead, and against us.
Yeah.
So that's the tragedy of the whole structure when it gets used against the people. So I've just got one more slide to bring up. Okay, so this is the last slide I have on the constable, just to give people just that little bit more appreciation of what it was that was created for them. So a proper chief constable of constabulary is not someone promoted from within the constabulary. So obviously, you can think about where we are today and what it was created for, so you can see the contrast. A true chief constable of constabulary was someone fully knowledgeable of the law of the land, aka common law, of high standing within his shire. Obviously they had shires there, we don't have shires in Australia, and was fully independent of government during peacetime. That's a really big statement when we think about that they had no influence whatsoever from government in peacetime.
And that's because they essentially oversaw government, their job was to oversee government to make sure that the people's rights were not being taken away or infringed.
Correct. That's why the people created it, because they needed that independent arm separate to make sure that there could never be that breaching of that boundary. And that's why it was such an esteemed position, because they're really the people's guardians.
Absolutely. But as soon as that became under control of government, and then they would have been part of the legislative arm or the enforcement arm, the executive arm, I beg your pardon, of that pillar, if you like, the three things that are holding up the people and the sovereign in our trinity of power, then this really is the point where they had to restrain the constable's power, because to have that sort of power over the government would mean that they wouldn't be able to get away with anything. And once again, this leads us back to the suppression of Magna Carta 1215 and the illusion of Magna Carta 1297.
Yes, that's why they needed to create a legislative rewrite or a statute version, because that's the only way on paper could they start running, the whole slavery structure that we live under today. They couldn't do it any other way. So they needed to create a fictional version of it and have people believe that that is legitimate. And to do that, you take elements of things people can recognize, and then you mix it up with things that you want to happen. And then you slowly take away piece by piece the things that people can recognize, and it's done over centuries, just very gradually, to there's really all power in the hands of that which you've created and nothing in the hands of the people. And so that's a very clearly premeditated, long sort of plan that's been underway for centuries.
My God, the intellect that went into building this plan staggers me.
Yeah, you can imagine that kind of intellect appropriated for the purpose of, growing our connection with one another. What kind of life we'd be living.
And we are 100% sure that this is deliberate action. Society just didn't grow this way naturally.
Correct. It had to have been deliberately designed piece by piece and very cleverly, so then it would not be so easily noticed. People always know something's not right, but because it's done in a gradual fashion, they can adjust to it. But if it's done immediately, they don't have the time of adjustment. So that's why it's always done very gently and gradually, because they require times to adjust, and then just as they've adjusted, then there's another change.
Yeah.
So then they get used to that pattern of always adjusting over a stretch of time.
And we've seen that exact pattern emerge throughout coronavirus lockdowns and all that sort of stuff.
Yes. Yeah, it's just an accelerated pattern. That's the only difference. Yeah. But yes, it is the same pattern. There's no difference. So the next slide I want to bring up is about police prosecution powers. Okay, so I've got a different color on this one, just to show there's a contrast. So under the British Commonwealth Constitution, which is the 1215 Magna Carta, the people are the prosecutors of any acts of injustice committed against them, not third parties like the police do today. Yep. I think that started coming into effect in the 19th century from memory, from reading. Okay. It never existed before. So if you think about it, right, as soon as someone takes the right to prosecute from your hands, well, how do you have control over how the claim goes, right?
Yes.
There's no power in your hands now. Some third body's deciding what's going to happen and how they're going to go about prosecuting it. Yeah. Well, that's all we've ever known. We've never known in any other way. If you were to ask an individual, if a crime was committed against you, would you believe that you have the right to actually run that case for yourself? No one would think twice that they would.
No, true.
So to take that power away from us, that's an act of treason, because if we are truly sovereign, well, how can someone else decide for us, how we wish to prosecute something? So that's one of the biggest tricks that's been played on us, putting faith in a third party that's only responsible for bringing someone to, a place where justice can be served. Well, now they're the ones who are deciding how that justice is going to roll out. And that's not justice. You can't give the same role. I mean, you can't condense, multiple roles into one, place. Yeah. That's like what happened with the judges, right? They took the role of the jury and the convener.
Yes.
So the police have done the same thing. So like you said earlier about what government, as soon as they get their hands on something, there's no justice there. It's gone.
I think you've just nailed the reason why so many people can walk away from the court system and feel there has been no justice for them, because, as you say, the prosecution has been taken away from them. The plea bargaining that goes on between the lawyers. The, if you like, victim is not a party to that generally. So you find that the crime might be somehow downgraded to a lesser thing if they decide to plead to plead guilty to a lesser charge. Is that justice for the person that's had the act committed against them?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We innately know that, right? That's why, like, where you started out was, people come out of this system still feeling ripped off.
Yeah.
Like they're not coming out of it having that sense of satisfaction that justice has been served. Like they innately know it hasn't, because the control has been taken out of their hands. They're just supposed to, rely on someone who knows better. That's the way it's sold.
And
they don't know better.
The legal system leads people to that. I'm thinking now of class actions where we see, at least in Australia, there are a couple of very large law firms that advertise quite regularly for class actions in various different guises. Sometimes those class actions are successful, but we always have to understand that the court system is not there for us, the people. The court system is there to help the corporation.
Correct. Because it is a corporation.
That's right.
So it's going to help its buddies. So yeah, you're correct. Like, it's never going to be in the service of the people. It's going to create the illusion that it's in the service of the people. But in actual fact, when we come out of it, we innately know justice hasn't been served. We just don't know how to, deal with it in a different way, because there's no conditions for a different access point. So then we just come to that, well, this is just how it is.
Yeah.
That's what we come to accept. There's no other way to do it.
In the Australian system, we have a police prosecutor at least up to, I want to say, the county court level. A police prosecutor can act in the county court, I think, but not above that. That needs to be a fully qualified, if you like, barrister to go on from there. Now, that then removes the police and the people from the argument completely and takes it into the realm of pure legal, doesn't it?
Yeah, correct. So then again, there's a real aggrievement happened to a living sentient being, yet the way it's played out is nothing to do with, real sentient beings being in charge of it. It's all about what's done on paper, like fictional creations. And then that legal structure actually has its own way, like a procedure or process by which that's all played out within rules that are fictional, that's been invented in the mind of somebody, or like the British Accreditation Registry, which is what the bar means. Mm-hmm. An organization that's got nothing to do with justice. It's all about their private rules and how something plays out within that structure, where they are always in control and fully in charge of the outcome. So how has that got anything to do with a living sentient being getting their needs for justice met?
Absolutely.
It's not going to happen.
You mentioned the bar there before. Now, you staggered me when you told me what the bar stands for. Just say it one more time.
British Accreditation Registry.
And to what are people actually accredited to when they join the bar?
To the Vatican.
Don't think many people would recognise that.
No, it's a very private society, but they're running off, what's the term? Roman Admiralty?
Roman
rules, I guess they're called.
Yeah, Admiralty law, law of the sea.
Yeah, so that's the law of commerce.
Yeah.
That's what they're signing up to when they go into that, and that's what they take that oath to. And
we've all heard of the vast vaults under the Vatican containing, books from that have been, meticulously kept for thousands of years by people at the Vatican. Those books are actually shipping registries controlling commerce around the world. They control the commerce from the Vatican.
Yes, that's correct. So that's what we are when we go into their courts. We're being shipped out. So we're like, got a consignment. It's like having a consignment note, it's really just like you're getting shipped from one warehouse to another.
Yeah.
And it's just the exchange that's happening when that's going, and someone needs to get paid and it isn't you. And that's
yeah. It's more likely than not you're the one doing the paying as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You're doing the moving and the paying. There's
Yeah.
not an upside for we the people here, really, is there?
No, like you're being charged for the labour you're putting in for going in there.
Yeah, yeah. They got us coming and going. They've got us
Yes.
coming and going. It is just, I mean, it is just such a heinous crime to commit against everybody, like commit against humanity. This isn't just Australians this is happening to. This is happening to everybody. And you know, we can be lucky that we are in Australia, because if we were in Africa, it'd be happening at a damn side stronger level than it is here. So, you know, I think there are small mercies that we can look to, but let's get back to the issue at hand. I know you've got a fistful of slides that we want to get through, and we've only got another 25 or so minutes to get through them. So let's hook on. Oh, that one will make an impression.
Okay, so the reason why I've put an explanation at the top is because this is even though the word police, you will not find this definition written anywhere. That's the actual lived, felt experience of what police do, is they control by force.
Yes, I agree.
So that's the reason why I put it up there. So even though you can't find it somewhere, we all have that experience of how they go about doing what they do. And so if you think about all the videos you'll see, you know, of people who are trying to stand up for their rights, the first thing the police will do is they won't let them go anywhere until they establish what they call their identity, which is, you know, they need their name, their date of birth, and their address.
So that's the first things the police ask you.
Yep. Then they run it under the guise that they need to know who they are, right? That's the way they run it. But that's the legal system that's been created for them to actually identify the account that we just spoke about in that shipping registries.
Right.
Which is created for you when you're born, when your parents fill out your birth certificate, you know, when they register, Regis being the king.
Yep.
So, you know, they're basically signing you over as property of the Crown. And so we look at the Crown on top of this Victoria Police logo. And as it says, it's the Catholic Crown. So it's a St. Edward's Crown. So they're telling you under what everything's happening. You know, what's at the top here? It's that St. Edward's Crown, the Catholic Crown.
Right. Now, just explain the difference in the crown to people who don't understand.
So this crown has got a dip in it. That's the biggest sort of difference. And the Imperial Crown is like got a curve in it. There's no dip in it. And so the Imperial Crown is the crown that the people of England, or Britain as well, that office of sovereign is symbolized by that curved crown. I think it's called convex, the shape.
Yep.
And so it's a symbol that symbolizes the law of the land, that the people grant authority for someone to step into a role to protect. And they give them, you know, the power of the people's assets, the people's labor, you know, to actually administer that in an organized fashion, so that the people
the benefit of the people.
Yes, exactly. So the people can live in that system of equity that they require for there to be peace and harmonious coexistence.
Sure.
So that's that intuitive knowledge that they know, but they need to organize it. So that's why they created this crown. So when we say crown, it doesn't actually mean a monarch as much as it means a place of trust that the people will have their confidence in. And so they created that office. Now, when you look at this crown, that's an inversion, right? This is a control. This is all about control.
This is a
coming from
crown.
You've eloquently put who that's coming from. So, you know, it's coming from non-elected people.
It's coming from non-elected men who are elected to the papal position by other non-elected men. And they have a very secret little society around them. And then, of course, the Pope decided to rewrite Magna Carta 1215 and then called it Magna Carta 1297, the update, and and expected it to be believed. So this is a graphic example, if you like, of the of where Catholicism met Magna Carta.
Yeah, and so the thing about the British Constitution is, it was written by English people for the land of England. So no one has authority to just come in and override it. That's not a thing. The only way someone could override someone else's agreement within themselves, within their territory, is if they conquered them in open battle.
Yep.
There's no other way it could happen. And that wasn't the case. So how
did the Catholic priest or Catholic Pope get the power, much less be accepted for rewriting an English document signed by an English king, written by English barons on behalf of the English people or the Commonwealth people? How could a Catholic Pope just decide to change all that?
Yeah, so a really quick way to sort of really articulate what that means is, imagine that if I just show up to your house and I just say to you that your marriage with your wife is annulled because I just say so. That's pretty much a really quick way to explain what that attempt was.
Yeah.
Now, who would accept that? How many people would accept that?
Do it the Catholic way.
Yeah, like, this is not the way it's done. I'm going to tell you, we're going to start again, and I'm going to set the rules of how your marriage is to actually function now.
Yeah,
that's what happened.
That's a great analogy. I see in this image that you have up on the screen the Roman wreath. So the Vatican, particularly when it pertains to Victorian police, does play a role.
Well, when you look at all the other logos across the country, you'll see the same thing. You will see that crown at the top, and you'll see that Roman wreath. They're just centerpiece is different. Like the Adelaide one, I think the South Australian one, they have a picture of a crow. I think it's a magpie.
Yeah.
The Queensland one, I think they have the cross of Malta in there.
Yeah.
So you'll see, but those two things are always permanent. So, you know, if people want to have a look themselves, you're going to have a big eye-opening moment. The two things that are always permanent is that crown and that Roman wreath, which is the laurel wreath, I think it's called.
Yep.
And you'll see that around anything to do with the UN as well. They'll have that same wreath.
Yep.
So you'll see a bit of overlap.
So you've also pointed out here that the corporation is listed.
Yes. So anything that's all caps, right? Victoria Police, as you can see here, it's written all capital letters. Well, the only time you see things in all capital letters, if people want to take a quick walk down to the cemetery, they can have a look at how people's names are represented on those tombstones. And you might be surprised to see they're all in all capitals. So the whole idea of all capitals is like what's the word I'm after? It's a diminishing of status. So as soon as you move into an all capitals representation, your status has been diminished. And so in this case, it means something's dead.
Yeah.
And only a corporation can be dead. It can't be a living entity.
Yep.
So that's why they put it in all capitals, so that you can see that this is not a living entity with living beings in it. It's all a fictional construct.
Essentially, so those tombstones are marking the place of death of your straw man.
Yes, correct.
They're not marking your physical body, although they just happen to be placed on top of it. They're actually signifying the death of your straw man to the corporation.
Yeah, and obviously there's a surety in there, and that's your body. You're the surety. You're the one who acts as the body for that creation. Something needs to act for it. So that's you. The actual physical body's being, inserted in there, because that was what your role was.
Yes, you had to fulfill the role of the straw man. And if the straw man dies, so do you. Yeah,
so that's why it's all connected. And so, if people want to do their own research, there's the ABN number. They can look it up just to verify that. That's why I've put it up there.
Yep, sure.
So people can see, it is discoverable. It's not just things that are being made up.
The most obvious yet inobvious sign in this whole graphic that you've got up is the inverted pentagram.
Yeah, look, when I first had that drawn to my attention, I was like, how could I miss that, right? Like, I just wasn't even looking.
Yep.
Never even thought to look. And so if you look at the pentagram, right, if you really look, the bottom is the chin of the goat.
Yep.
The two on the side, they're the ears, and the two at the top are the horns. Now, the goat is the symbol that the Satanists use.
Yeah.
So that's where they've come to, invert it, because they love their attachment to animals.
Yes.
And so you can sort of take a visual of that, and you can really see the head of the goat on that. And so anything that's inverted is inverted of reality as well. So it's that Saturnian inverted logic. So they're running off that. So it's quite frightening when you actually see it like that. The whole time, these guys that believe they're coming here for your protection, that's what they believe when they go into the academy. You know, the symbolism is showing you what they've come to do.
Yeah.
And it's quite frightening when you really are confronted with that knowledge.
Now, I haven't got every Australian police force badge up here in front of me, but I do know that all of them do not contain an inverted pentagram.
No, I think there's only one that I know of memory. Like I said, I haven't gone through them in detail. I don't have a recall of anyone else having an inverted one. For some reason, Victoria has a special relationship with the goat.
Yes.
And the other thing is, when you look at uphold the right now, you start wondering, well, what right? Uphold the right to what? You know, that's the thing where it's ambiguous. It's not actually specific. And so you could interpret it, you know, uphold the right to enforce slavery, right? That could be one interpretation.
Yep, exactly.
When you look at all the other symbolism around here. And then the blue cross over the red, I tried really hard to work out what that was. The only closest thing I could see was possibly the Eureka Stockade flag, possibly.
That's all I've been able to see through it. Yeah, the Eureka Stockade flag. Yet
when you put blue over red, that's a very Freemason thing.
Okay.
So when you start looking up Freemasonry symbols, you'll see blue over red. So I'm just curious as to whether there's some relationship there, and it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't. You know, if that was the case, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well,
we'll
ask our listeners and viewers to do a little digging on that one, shall we? If you've any interest in helping us find out a little bit of truth about the centre of the Victorian Police logo, then please go to it and let us know. We're all ears, aren't we, Fitz?
Yeah, for sure. So the other thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to the way, the structure, and we talked about that Sesta KV trust, you know, like when your parents signed the birth certificate.
Yep.
We spoke about, you know, the dead fiction that gets created. So the reason why, you know, police will always ask you for your name, your date of birth, and your address is because that's how they can open that account. So that fictional account that got created in your name when you were born, that's how things are charged, you know, and money's moved. So what happens is they make an estimate of what they believe the mineral and energy wealth is of the entire earth. And then they divide it by the number of people that exist on the earth. And that's kind of the figure that they come up with when they open your account of what your
birthright, if you like.
Yes, what you're worth. On top of that, they also work out how much they'll be able to extract from you in like taxes and fines and et cetera, you know, all those things they invent of how to utilize your labor, but from a remunerated position.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how they sort of figure out how much is it going to be in that account. And then they trade it with each other on the stock market. We don't know that. And so why they actually need to establish your identity, what they call your identity, is because if they can't open their account, then the only people who are going to get charged are the judges and the police. And that's why they have to take like an insurance bond, an indemnity bond.
Yeah, right.
Because if they can't open your account, you know, and establish your identity, that fictional identity, the straw man, then the money's got to come out of somewhere. So anything that happens has always got to be a transaction behind it. So everything's motivated by a transaction. It's got nothing to do with justice. That's the horrific part, right? So when they're grabbing you and saying, if you don't give me your address and your name and your date of birth, well, I need to arrest you. It's because they need to use the most coercive things they can to get you to, you know, it's like a shakedown, really.
Yeah.
You're basically getting, a shakedown because they need to use whatever method they can to put you in a position where you're just going to be glad to give them what they want, you know, just so you can get your freedom back. And so that's...
Under Magna Carta 1215, we have protections against that. And you personally have used some of those protections.
Yes. So I've stood in front of, like a senior leading constable, leading senior sergeant and a senior constable who were trying to put a protection order out of me by another police officer. And then I had my phone ready and I was recording. And then I read them out the constitutional caution card that comes from, knowledge of the Magna Carta.
Yep.
And one of the most phenomenal experiences I've ever had in my life was when they went silent, especially the leading senior sergeant. And he didn't say a word. When I asked him, does he understand the consequences of what he's doing and what's coming to him because of that? He went silent, wouldn't say a word.
Yeah.
And then he still tried to hand me the paperwork. And I said, I'm not taking that. That's treason. He just put on the ground and turned around and walked off, and so did his constable, in absolute silence, like they were made of stone. They just didn't look left or right. They didn't make another sound. They just sat in their car and looked straight ahead like I didn't exist. It was the most, I don't even know how to explain what I just witnessed then.
Yeah.
It was like I was dreaming. I've never believed that men armed with that much volume of armory would just walk away with their tails between their legs like that.
The power of words, my friend, the power of words.
Yeah, and that's that knowledge as well, like having that knowledge, because if that wasn't true, why would they walk away?
Exactly.
So that means they know something that they're not letting on, and they're running off a system of getting your consent. And the way what they call consent is, it doesn't matter that they use force, it's still consent.
Yeah.
They don't look at how they get the consent. That's irrelevant. It's not like it's informed consent that matters. It's just as long as they get consent, and that is by you giving them the name that they require to open up that account. That's how it's done.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part of the whole thing. That's what they get trained to do in those academies. So because if they can't charge your account, it gets charged to theirs. And if it happens enough times in their account, they lose their no claims bonus, which could lead, to not getting any insurance. And if they can't get insurance, they lose their job.
Yep.
That's how the system's structured. So it's either you or them. That's how horrific the whole system is.
I know that there are a couple of police officers that watch this show. They're friends of mine. I've known them for many years. I would be very interested in hearing from them, maybe not openly, but if they've got anything they'd like to share with by way of information, what they learned going through the academy, I'd be very interested in hearing from them. Or if any of our listeners happen to know a police officer that might be interested in talking, and obviously we understand that there is certain delicacies that we'll obviously take into account there and protect people's identification if necessary. So very keen to learn more about what the police know, and particularly what they're taught as they go through the academies in Australia. And I think, Fitz, you'd be interested in learning a bit about that too.
For sure, because, they're being run as a private recruitment agency, these academies. The people have no control over who, gets to be in that position. It's done privately under private rules. So for sure, I'd love to know what they teach them. Absolutely, like specific from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to try and combat that one day too. Maybe we'll get you teaching common law one day at a police academy. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yes, absolutely. If not me, someone else who has the same knowledge, for sure. But, the academy would be still, those people would need to be elected by the community members who had confidence that they came from the right sort of, what would you call it, moral fiber. They come from the right the intention that's required for people's dignity to be upheld. So that would have to be the first step before there'd be anything else, is that they have to have the confidence of the people. And they live within the communities, because you see, if you ask most police officers, they never get stationed where they're from. They always get stationed somewhere else.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
So that's not an accident either.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's another part, as you can see, the difference between how it was meant to be and how it is now.
So, Fitz, we're coming to the end of our time today. Of course, we like to do these things every Thursday if we can possibly do it. And we're always happy to take people's questions. So if you've got a question for myself or for Fitz, by all means, please just leave it in the comments below, or contact us on Facebook, and we'll be able to ask the questions, hopefully give you the answer. People are certainly finding a lot of interest in learning about Magna Carta 1215. You mentioned the constitutional caution card, Fitz. We're going to try hopefully in the near future to get a website up together. So if people want access to these sorts of materials, we should be able to supply them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely what we're working towards, and little pocket size bits of knowledge that it's really important that people have on them. So then, if they're ever confronted in a situation, because it's really hard to have instant memory recall.
Yes.
So just to have something you can have in your wallet that you can just whip out, it's invaluable, and it changes the outcome, especially if you have a capacity to record it, because you're grabbing evidence then, and that changes everything. So yeah, this is what we really are working towards, is to actually build the infrastructure by which people can actually, really have that confidence that they can stand in their power in the moment.
We don't want people to go off half-cocked. We will teach people the processes that have to be followed. You cannot shortcut these processes. If you shortcut the process, you're going to fall into their legal, and then you're trapped. So if you want to use all the information that we're very happy to supply, understand that it has to be used as you are taught it. If you try and freelance it in some way, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Words mean things. You have to use specific words. You have to use them in a specific order in some cases. You have to act in specific manners in some cases. So this isn't just a matter of dropping a notice on somebody's desk and walking away. This is a real process that people have to learn, Fitz.
Yeah, correct. And it's always about standing in honour, never breaching the peace. They're the two sort of key pillars as to how this works. So if you get into argument, you've lost the whole point of what you're doing. So it's about putting you in a position where you have enough knowledge to know that you never need to get into an argument. And that's the centerpiece of the whole thing. So yes, that's why it's important to have a process and a procedure by which it's done, and a base knowledge of why you're doing it.
Fitzroy Sterling, once again, an enthralling hour learning about Magna Carta 1215, and today about the constable role and how it was perverted into what we call police today. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I look forward to our next one.